Hello and welcome to this month's workshop, The Coach's Role in a Professional Learning Cycle. Thank you so much if you registered, and thank you if you are watching the recording on YouTube. I will get us going. Here we go. So a little bit about me. These are just some bullet points about me. I am nationally board certified. I was a EC generalist, and I've been trained in both letters and through IMSE for Orton Gillingham. I have over 16 years. Gosh, I've lost a little bit of count. So it's at least 16. I have two boys that are elementary aged. I love to read and to work out. And I was a first and fourth grade teacher. But truly, first grade is my first love. I love that grade level. So let me know if we connect about anything. I welcome comments on the recording so that I can know who's viewing this and who's learning from this. I am a consultant, and my company is Linda Rhyme Consulting. The work that I do is focusing on supporting schools and districts with improved literacy and instructional coaching systems while honoring the people that work in them. I care deeply about the people that find themselves in education systems, and I think it's important that we honor their voice in the systems that they're working within. So I certainly love supporting instructional coaches, and I'm glad that you're here today. The goal for this session is we're going to compare what the teacher's role is and the coach's role while we find ourselves kind of in this plan, do, check, act professional learning cycle. And then we're going to think about how do we design a professional learning cycle using the parallel stance of teach, support, reflect, advise. And then we're also going to reflect on how do we kind of use this approach to create a safe and supportive learning environment for the teachers that we support. Here's what this will look like today. We're in the middle of the welcome and the introduction. Then we'll review or reconfirm your understanding of the plan, do, check, act cycle, kind of level set how I'm seeing it and approaching it. And then we'll jump into the parallel stance of teach, support, reflect, advise, or as you see here, TSRA. And then we'll think about the possible impact of using this approach and any connections that we can make. And then, of course, we'll close. There are some resources that I welcome you using. If you registered for today's session, I sent you a workbook that goes alongside this. And if you're watching this video on YouTube, I'll make sure to link a copy of the workbook in the description as well. If you would like, I encourage us collaborating on the Padlet, which is where there's going to be a place in today's session where we can brainstorm where are we seeing elements in our work that allows us to be in that parallel coaching stance. So this Padlet is where you'll want to be if you want to participate in that. Okay, so let's think about why considering our parallel stance matters when we're thinking about supporting teachers. So we know that attending professional learning does not necessarily mean that we will translate that into classroom practice. And we've kind of known this since Darling Hammond published in 2009 the findings that 90% of teachers participate in useless professional development. Useless was the terminology used. And yet professional learning is a giant approach that we use. And so I want us to think about what is our role as coaches, either in supporting a current professional learning cycle that we are in, or facilitating that professional learning and then finding ways for this to be more effective. So the Center for Public Education published a report that identified 5 principles of effective professional development, and we see them listed here. If we want teachers to implement what they are learning, they are going to need ongoing support that is specific to their classrooms, requires their active engagement. We want them to be thinking about, yeah, I want this to work, and I need to think about how I want that to go. And then they need to be reflecting as they are supported. So how are we doing this? This is where we can be in a parallel coaching stance while teachers find themselves kind of in this plan, do, check, act. So we're going to dive into that and see where this takes us. So in a plan, do, check, act cycle, we want to kind of ask ourselves and center ourselves. This is the teacher stance. This is what teachers are doing when they are in a plan, do, check, act cycle. And if you're using the workbook, there is a space for you to take notes about kind of each of these parts of the cycle. So the first step in this improvement cycle or professional learning cycle is plan, right? This is that first step where teachers are learning and planning. We might see this happening during a professional development session or a staff meeting, some kind of after-school PD, maybe during a PLC, whatever it is, but the teachers are doing some learning and they're attaching it to planning or planning instruction, planning a lesson, right? So that's kind of how we can picture this is the learning and planning part of that plan, do, check, act cycle. And then as they move into the next phase, this is where they start implementing something or practicing something. So they might, for example, have learned a certain engagement strategy, a simple, something simple, even like turn and talk, that might be new for them. And they've done some planning about and identified some places in their lesson where turn and talk might be a good place for them to engage students. And then the do is, hey, I'm going to give it a go. I'm going to give it a go with that lesson and see kind of how it goes and try it. Then, the next part that often gets skipped, admittedly, right, is we want to check our implementation through reflection, right? So teachers are really good at the plan and the do, and then it's the check part that often falls off. We sometimes don't leave time for this reflective practice where it's like, hey, how did that go? Is there anything that I want to be seeing in terms of evidence of how many turn and talks did I do? Did I follow through with my plan, et cetera? So that's kind of what this part is this reflective part of the professional learning cycle. And then as a part of, or the next piece of the reflective cycle is then we want to think about what am I needing to adjust? And therefore, what am I going to implement or in these tweaks? Or, am I good to go? And I'm good to move on to the next layer of this learning or the next piece, or just can figure out how am I going to make what it is that I've learned and implement, how am I making it more routine or a more routine practice for me? So that's kind of, we want to decide like, what is my action in response to this reflection? So again, plan, do, check, act. These are the teacher actions when they are in this professional learning cycle. So I encourage you to share what are some of your thoughts about and experiences with this form or approach to a professional learning cycle of improvement. Feel free to drop it in the comments on YouTube. All right, so let's move into this parallel stance. What role do coaches play then when teachers find themselves in a plan, do, check, act, or when we kind of need them to be in a plan, do, check, act? What can coaches be doing? What type of actions might we see from them? So this is where coaches are teaching and guiding planning, right? They're kind of taking on the role of the professional development facilitator or the professional development teacher, really, right? They're helping teachers gain that knowledge from that professional learning experience. And so we might not be the experts per se, but we might find ourselves that we are part of supporting that planning process as teachers are learning the professional learning topic that we're focused on. So for example, we might see that coaches are introducing a new protocol or strategy for teachers to use. They might be in a planning meeting and modeling how something might go. It might even be sharing an article and, engaging teachers in dialogue about that text. It might be walking teachers through a particular part of a curriculum or even everybody watching a video of instruction and then analyzing it and having some discussion together. So it could take many forms. It could be, a very traditional form of professional development, but it also can take place kind of during weekly planning sessions in multiple forms. And so I encourage you, if there are ideas that you have about where are your opportunities to be in a teach stance alongside teachers who are planning and learning, feel free to add that to the Padlet. So as teachers move into the next phase, right, this is when they're in the do phase, coaches are really serving as thought partners and they are the support. So teachers, remember, are implementing and they're giving this a go, but it's maybe their first time giving it a go. And so coaches are going and, at supervisors, right, we're going to want to go see what they're doing right away. But this is not the next part of the phase, okay? This is not necessarily where we turn around and we get right in there and see what they're doing. But we can offer our support as a thought partner because teachers are often their own worst critics and they're going to be paying attention to when things are going wrong, often without us even prompting that. And so during this phase, we can make ourselves available to pull up our sleeves and work alongside a teacher as they're thinking through current challenges of that implementation. We might be offering some looking to be invited to meet with the teacher and problem solve with them, or they might invite us to come into the classroom and see what's going on. And so coaches might be doing a guided debrief session during a planning meeting, right? Like, hey, friends, how did that go? We all tried that. Where are we with that, right? Like, what kind of support can I provide? Should I be doing any more thinking to prepare for all of us? Are we all experiencing the same problem? This might be facilitating discussion among colleagues, right? And getting them to start talking to each other about what did they try? How did it go? Or even offering some office hours because we know that teachers are giving this a go. So that the thing to be careful about here is that we are not then turning around and going in for some formal observation. We need to give teachers a minute so that they can give this a go and do the first draft practice that they need in order to try something new without the pressure of getting it right the first time. Okay, so now is our chance to do what we do best and get judgy. Just kidding, because of course we don't judge, right? We listen, we don't judge. But this is our chance as coaches to now visit classrooms, gather evidence, and gather data that's going to support the teacher in their reflection about their implementation, right? So we want to be really strategic about what it is that we're going into the classroom to observe. We want to be providing specific feedback about the bite-sized item that they're working on and possibly nothing else. Maybe we'll make a later list, right, of the other things that we see that we would love to talk to them about. But this is focused on that professional learning. So whatever it was that we were working on in the teach part of the cycle or the plan part for the teacher, right? This reflection piece that is what that's focused on. These two are connected. It's why they're in the same column. So for example, we might we might work with a teacher to use some video to get some actual video footage of what it was that they were implementing so that we can both together reflect on the implementation of that. The coach might take my favorite low inference observations and notes where they're just collecting what did the teacher say, what did the students say, and gather those timestamps so that, again, we have something that we can analyze together and reflect on where are we, right? Where are we with this implementation, which is going to lead us into that next part of the improvement cycle. It's really important during this phase that we hold up what we are seeing during classroom instruction to what was expected and agreed upon as the success criteria during that teach phase, right? So during that teach phase, during that planning phase for the teacher, we want to be clear on like, what is it that we're trying to do with this learning? What are we anticipating that we're going to see that tells us, yep, we're on the right track. That is what then we are able to reflect on in this phase. So again, if you have ideas about where this shows up in your work, I encourage you to jump into the Padlet. And if I didn't say that on the previous slide, feel free to go back and do that for support as well. Okay, so the last part of this phase from a coach's lens is that we might find ourselves advising, right? And this doesn't mean that we are telling the teacher what to do, but as we reflect alongside them, we might find that we are saying, yeah, hey, here's where we might go next. But also, here's what we might want to tweak or what we might want to rethink, and find ourselves going back to maybe the support phase or the teach phase. And so, if the teacher's implementation is really solid, we as the coach need to be prepared before we come to a conversation for what does come next, right? Because we might find ourselves back in the teach phase again, and we want to be prepared for that. Um, we might want to be prepared for what are we seeing in that reflect phase that requires a new resource, or might the teacher could just tweak one little thing and we might see a very different approach to implementation. So we want to make sure that this is a very data-driven conversation from the reflect phase where we collected that information. And then what our position is will depend on the capacity of the teacher. As we find ourselves reflecting on that with the teacher and considering what their perspectives are, if the path that they're heading down with the knowledge that they have is leading them away from the success criteria and the goal of this professional learning, then that is a place where we might want to step in and support them with where do we go next? And so we may find ourselves kind of in that role of an advisor, but most of that depends on what we're hearing from the teacher in the course of that conversation. So just a reminder, I encourage you to add what are your coaching strategies or where do you see opportunities for these strategies? In each of these phases, teach, support, reflect, advise, there are spaces for that on the Padlet. So again, what does this look like as we're working alongside teachers? When teachers are planning, coaches are teaching or guiding, right? Depending on what it is that we're teaching or supporting. When teachers are implementing or doing, right? Coaches are supporting, they're serving as that thought partner. When teachers are checking and, thinking about their implementation, we are offering reflections, and even just supporting the teacher with reflection, right? Our gathering of data is supporting that teacher's reflection. And then when teachers are acting or considering where do I go from here, we might find ourselves advising either more heavily or a little bit less as well. So how does considering our parallel stance shift to doing professional development with teachers? I encourage you to pause the video and drop a comment. What are you seeing here? How does this engage us in this professional learning cycle? How do we find ourselves kind of side by side and sitting with them in this professional development rather than doing it to them? I look forward to seeing your comments. So I mentioned this earlier, but I want to kind of stamp it clearly, is that something I encourage us to consider is that in the first two phases of the cycle, right? So plan and do for the teachers and teach and support for us as coaches. We need to create room for safe practice by avoiding immediately visiting the teacher's classroom, right? So instead, we lean on being invited in or supporting the teacher in whatever way feels right in terms of creating safety when they're implementing their learning. This is a really hard time to be a teacher. There's a lot of scrutiny on what we're doing, and there's a lot of expectation that we have to get it right, and we have to get it right away. And that is really difficult to do when you're learning something new. So when we go in and we observe right away, we're communicating that expectation like, hey, you learned this, now you should be getting it right. And it doesn't necessarily leave room for the safe practice that teachers need in order to develop new routines and habits, which is really what we're trying to do. And so if you find yourself working with teachers who are in the professional learning, they seem really with it and excited about giving it a go, and yet their practices don't change. This might be the thing that's missing, is that they are not getting the safe practice and encouragement to give something a go that they need. This is the time that we expect mistakes and bumps in the road will occur. And in fact, we need teachers to just try it so that we have something to work with. It's much harder to coach someone around doing something if they haven't done it. And so this can actually be a really important element. But I also don't want to forget that it is our job as coaches to hold teachers accountable to some of those expectations that we set out. And so when I was mentioning before, like there is an element of what is our success criteria? What are we trying to do by implementing the thing, right? We can serve as that accountability partner with teachers and say, hey, I am not sure that we're seeing this to yes, you gave this a go, and I am so proud of you for trying it. And I'm not sure that we're meeting our success criteria yet. So let's think about what we want to do there, right? How can I support you? Let's think about how I can support you through that reflection. What do we see in the evidence from our classroom visit that's telling us we could be working on or adjusting the next time that you try it? This is where the accountability comes in. And because teachers have had the opportunity for some safe practice, they are a little bit more willing to work with us on like, yep, you're right. Like we have the evidence here that says I'm not quite doing, preparing students for turn and talks the way that I might be able to. So let's explore that. Just to lean on my earlier example. So this is not necessarily, the safe practice part is not saying we will never hold them accountable to high expectations or implementing the professional learning, but it does give a little bit of a grace period that allows them to try it without the immediate expectation to get it right. I've had questions before about like, what does this look like if we're in a 4-week cycle or a 6-week cycle? So I'm just going to give some examples here. If we think about this in weeks and that makes sense for you, it's possible this would take up to 4 weeks. But remember, this is about a professional learning, right? So you have to remember this is a little bit different than selecting a bite-sized action for teachers. So if it were a bite-sized thing, it's possible you could get through all of these kind of phases, right? A coaching cycle in a week. This is really addressing professional learning. And so teachers might need a little bit more time to process their learning, especially if we're working on developing some new instructional habits. And so we might find that each of the phases, happens over the course of a week. And there's some major impact possibility with this, right? So I'm a literacy gal, but I'm going to do some math with you. A typical school year is about 180 days, right? Meaning we have 36 weeks per year. And therefore, potentially the opportunity to do 9 professional learning cycles with our teachers, which means that we might be able to map out our professional learning plan for the year in a way that matches some cycles of support as well. Knowing that, of course, we would need some flexibility. And then in a 6-week cycle, you can play around with this, but this is just an example. We might find that 4 weeks is not enough for the learning that a teacher needs to do, right? So we might do the teach in week 1 and the plan in week 1. We might do the implementation and support in week 2, move to the check and reflect in week 3. And what we find is that in week 4, as we're reflecting on our actions and where do we go from here, we're back in tweaking what that implementation and do part looks like. And so we might find ourselves back in a supporting role as well as then moving into reflection and advising in week 6. And so let's do some more math again. This is, again, an opportunity for us to kind of think through our professional learning plan in terms of cycles, right? So given the same barriers or boundaries where we have 180 days and 36 weeks per year, this affords us the opportunity for 6 professional learning cycles with teachers if we're taking up to 6 weeks, even given some of the flexibility of what that would mean. It's a large impact. So I'm going to circle back to where we started, which is, do we see any of the five principles of effective PD in this approach? Are we offering significant and ongoing support that's specific to the teacher during implementation? Are we engaging teachers actively in the process? Might we find ourselves modeling throughout this process to support teachers? And are we providing content that's specific to the audience? Forgive my typo. So as we begin to close, I want you to think about what are some of your next moves. There is a space for you to reflect on what might you want to do with this. And I do want to invite you to make some connections. I have a coaching system assessment. And so this work that we discussed today does support two of the indicators that are in that coaching system assessment. So this approach allows us to provide differentiated support based on teachers' needs, right? So we as coaches can be really responsive to teachers when we are applying these stances alongside a teacher during a professional learning cycle. And then we can also see that the elements of coaching cycles with pre-planning, safe practice, classroom observation, and debriefs also lives within that TSRA approach, even though it might be happening over a longer period of time because it's related to professional learning. But again, we see kind of those four elements living in the teach, support, reflect, advise. So I encourage you, if you have the workbook, to reflect on what can we do now with this approach and what can we do later with this approach. Maybe there's something you could start next week with one of your teachers, or there's an upcoming professional learning already planned. You might start to think through, what is your cycle of professional learning going to look like after that teach session. Obviously, we can't think, pair, share today because we're watching the recording, but I encourage you to self-reflect in your workbook or even just in your notes. And lastly, thank you so much for engaging in this work today. I always look forward to connecting with people who have engaged with my content or just in general. So these are all of the myriad of ways that we can do that. And I just thank you for being a part of this learning, and I welcome your feedback. So feel free to reach out. Happy coaching.